William was the seventh son and ninth child of John Kunz II and Rosina Canuti Kunz. He was born December 5, 1860 in Demptingen, Bern, Switzerland. He was baptized into the LDS Church May 12, 1869. He immigrated with his father's family to Utah in 1870 at age 9. During the fall of 1870, while the family was in Logan, William was one of the younger boys that gleaned wheat heads in the fields and had them threshed to have milled into flour to supplement the family's food supply. During the spring and summer of 1871 through 1875, he was helping his father at Ovid as he developed the dairy as one of his main cow herders, herding rented cows on the Bern Range. In 1875, when the family was ready to move to Bern, William became very sick with scarlet fever. Robert was sent to get Brother John Johnson, Delmer's wife Wanda's great-grandfather, a man full of faith, and he and John II administered to William. William was well within a few days. Helen May Kunz Jensen, William's daughter, writes of her father, "He was an unusually bright boy and had a great deal of self-confidence. When there was work that required skill, William was always the one to do it, and he usually received praise for what he did. Perhaps this developed in him a touch of reckless confidence." At age 18, William made a great effort to attend school in Provo, Utah, but lack of funds and the need of him at home caused him to abandon his dream for school. He was a clean, honest boy and was liked by everyone. William was proficient at breaking horses because he enjoyed horses and also riding the range. William was kind to people and always kind to animals. His parents always found him to be obedient and true. Helen May Kunz Jensen, William's daughter, said, "Had more opportunity been his, he would have been a leader among men because of his talent and personality." William was a good and studious reader and remembered easily that which he read. He had an excellent command of the language and was a splendid conversationalist. He made friends easily, and his home was always open to the hungry and tired. He had an inventive mind and was mechanically inclined. Robert and William both worked at the Kunz brothers' dairy with other of their brothers and their father for the next 7 years until the fall of 1882. During these years they gained experience, responsibility, and ownership. From Robert's history we know that William and Robert left Bear Lake in the early spring of 1882 before the summer milking season and went to Salt Lake City, where they were both married on May 4th, 1882. William was married to Eliza Eschler. Robert was married to Caroline Eschler, Eliza's sister. So the Kunz brothers married the Eschler sisters May 4th, 1882, in the endowment house. Caroline and Elisha's brother, Gottfried Eschler, was married at the same time to Rose Kunz, William J. and Johnny's sister, and their father and mother went along to be sealed. Upon their return, William and Robert were both still working with their father in the Bern dairy during the 1882, at which time the dairy was converted to the making of American cheese to eliminate the long aging time associated with making Swiss cheese. In the fall of 1882, William was one of the boys that sold his interest in the Kunz brothers' dairy and moved away from Bern. Between the fall of 1882 and the spring of 1883, William and Eliza moved to Wardboro and filed on a homestead. William started at once to prove up on that homestead by building of a house. Robert Kunz was the youngest son of John Kunz II and Rosina Canuti Kunz. He was the 8th son and 10th child. He was born December 16, 1862 in Demtingen, Bern, Switzerland. Robert was born the same year that Ulrich Buehler brought the gospel to the home of John Kunz I and baptized him and his daughter Rosina. After John Kunz II joined the church in 1869 and decided to immigrate in July of 1870, Robert was only 7.5 years old. During the fall of 1870 in Logan, Robert relates gleaning wheat heads in the fields with several of his brothers until he took sick with typhoid fever. He was sick for weeks, too sick to be baptized when he turned 8 on the 16th day of December. Robert remembers the suffering of the family in the small house they had rented in Logan for the first winter. Robert was baptized in October of 1871 by Thomas Peterson in Ovid Creek. Robert was feeling secure in the family circumstance in Ovid, as they had a home and was making cheese, and his father was accumulating some cows and sheep, until his mother became sick with an inflammation in her side that lasted for months. Robert relates that he overheard his mother and his older sister Catherine talking one day that if Rosina were to die, Catherine, who was about to be married to a good man, should take Robert because of his young age with her. It was about this time that Catherine married Lawrence Balmer of Malad, Idaho, and she moved to Malad. This conversation disturbed young Robert. After several days he went into his mother's bedroom, where she lay sick with the window blinded, and asked her if she did not think God could heal her if he wanted to. When she answered Robert by saying, "Oh yes, he could," Robert suggested to her that he would kneel down at the head of her bed and ask him to do so. Shortly after that Bishop Edlefson baptized her for her health in a cold-running slough. Then President William Budge gave her a patriarchal blessing and promised her that her years should be prolonged on the earth. Robert bore witness that his blessing was literally fulfilled, as she outlived Father by about 4 years. Robert relates working for Walter Hodge, who had the mail contract between Paris and Soda Springs. He hired Robert at 25 cents per trip to carry the Liberty mail from Ovid to Liberty on foot each day while he went to Soda Springs. Robert tells of his fear of Indians as a boy, and the many times he left the road and went straight to Bishop Austin's place, the postmaster in Liberty, through the meadows, crossing the creek on a pole to avoid the Indians. Robert relates that just before moving to Bern in 1875, William took sick with scarlet fever, and Robert was sent to get John Johnson, Delmer's wife, Wanda Johnson's great-grandfather, so John II and he could administer to William. Robert feels it was the rebuke made through the priesthood that kept him from contracting the disease, as he and William slept in the same bed. Robert says that after the family moved to Bern, his job was to herd the cows in the range above Bern on an old saddle-balky mule, which he did until he was 17 years old. Robert relates several life-threatening incidents while herding cows on that old mule. Once the mule fell with Robert on the ice, and Robert's foot became tangled in a strap, and he was dragged a considerable distance before he was able to get untangled. Another time the mule's feet became tangled while crossing a deep slough, and the mule fell and was thrashing about with Robert on the underside for a while. They were both nearly drowned, but he says through some power my life was saved. Robert relates occasionally locating animals on the range that he had lost by being shown their whereabouts in his dream. Robert says he always felt close to the Spirit. This is the range above Bern where the cows were pastured by Robert and others. This is looking on the west side of the peak. This is where we used to go camping when I was a Boy Scout and when I was an explorer. This is the area that we used to go camping in when my scout leaders would take us camping. Up here somewhere, right up in the back of the peak, was what we called Hupgubble. I don't know where that name came from, and I don't remember the exact location of Hupgubble, but it was somewhere up here, and we used to camp out there because there was a little spring there. Robert says at age 19 he met Caroline Eschler and kept her company for some time. Then Robert says in his history, we, Caroline Eschler and Robert Kunz, along with William and Eliza Eschler, went to Salt Lake City and were married on the 4th of May, 1882 in the Endowment House at Salt Lake City, Utah by Daniel H. Wells. Caroline's brother Gottfried Eschler and Rose Kunz were married at the same time, and John Eschler and Susanna Katharina Zwollen, Caroline's parents, were sealed. I had always worked for my father, and upon our return from Salt Lake City in the spring of 1882, we lived with Father in his home and began to operate an extensive American cheese factory. Father, Will, David, and I, Jacob, was the cheesemaker. Due to the crowded conditions on the open range in the fall of 1882, Robert says that everybody moved away from Bern, so he sold his interest in the Kunz Brothers Dairy, and he and Caroline moved to Montpelier into a house they rented from Blacksmith Jones. While in Montpelier, Emma Caroline, their first daughter, was born on the 29th of January. In the spring of 1883, Robert moved back to Bern, and he and Christian started a dairy where the Christian Kunz place is in North Bern. Apparently, Robert and Christian only operated this dairy for the summer season of 1883. He and Christian hired David Hershey for the summer to help at their dairy, and David tells in his journal of that experience and that he ate most of his meals sitting by Robert's wife, Caroline. Robert says again, because of the crowded condition on the open range, he again sold out in the fall of 1883 and moved to Thomas Fork, which is now Raymond. There he filed on a 160-acre homestead next to the homestead of his father-in-law, John Eschler. And during the summer of 1884, he hauled in 2 loads of logs and a load of lumber for a house to prove up on his homestead. When John and Rosina immigrated to Ovid in 1870, part of their family was still young, living at home and working with John, and some were married or soon to be married, starting families of their own. When John and Rosina immigrated to Ovid, most of the Bear Lake Valley, including the foothills and mountain ranges, were still unfenced open range. The land around Ovid was beginning to be homesteaded and fenced, but for the most part the land further north and east from Ovid, such as Bern and other extended locals, were still open range. Most of the land south of Ovid and along the west side of Bear Lake was fast becoming homesteaded because of the first settlers coming into the valley settled in Paris, and those parts going south first. Farmers that had secured deeds to tract of land in those areas needed the summers for putting up hay for the winter, and they found it convenient to rent their livestock out for the summers thus allowing them to have larger herds, as they could hay their whole acreages and they didn't have to use part of their farms for pasturing. Because of the conditions existing on these vast areas that were unfenced open range, they could not just turn their cattle out without herders, because there was no control of their roaming, nor of predators, nor of rustlers. And unless they had large families, they did not have sufficient herders. The Kunzes came along with dairying in mind and created a working situation for both the leasers and the renters of cattle. The Kunzes would rent cows, provide the herders necessary for their care, and take advantage of all the feed available on those vast tracts of unfenced open range, thus allowing those with homesteaded farms to utilize their acreage for winter hay, plus freeing up some of their time for haying. Because of the years and generations of experience in Switzerland and making cheese anywhere on the slopes along the Alps, they could set up a dairy almost anywhere there was water and take advantage of the feed available and turn the perishable milk into a non-perishable product like cheese with a shelf life, thus allowing them time to get a sellable product to market. Some of this open range was somewhat restricted by desert entry rights or individuals holding squatters' rights, which meant that other immigrants would respect their right to use the land because they were there first.